You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast, where we cover all things related to vertebrate pest management from a scientific point of view. Hey, glad to have you on board. Trust your week went well. As I've said earlier, I am in the midst of trying to get my podcasts out in advance so I can go on vacation, so you can still have content while I'm away. And we are in the midst of I should say maybe at the end of our 3-part series on Raccoon Roundworm. So this is part 3 of a 3-part series. And so if you're finding me here, understand that there's 2 other presentations that have occurred prior on different aspects of Raccoon Roundworm and what you should know about it. And so what stimulated this was I was talking with an individual who I was doing some work with, and she said when she reached out to various wildlife control operators, there were a number that didn't know what Raccoon Roundworm was, which is kind of scary, both for them and for their clients. So we want to be sure that we are trying to push back some of the bounds of ignorance here, because this is something that's important for you as a professional, both to protect yourself, your loved ones, and of course your clients. So if you have questions, comments, thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Going to be doing another presentation down the road here on carbon monoxide injectors and carbon monoxide in general. So that was kind of stimulated from a comment from one of our viewers. So again, if you have thoughts, you don't always have to hire me. Sometimes you can just simply say, hey, Steven, talk about this, and I'll take that under advisement. But I've generally been pretty accommodating, I guess is the right word, to listeners who are looking for a particular topic. Otherwise, I just talk about what I want. Well, as I tend to do at each presentation, highlight something that's available from our wildlifecontrolconsultant.com store. You can certainly pick up a copy of this, the Vertebrate Pest Handbook 3rd edition, where I've revised Dr. Austin Frischman's classic work, and he had a 2nd edition. I've made it into a 3rd edition and narrowed the scope just to focus on kind of commensal rodents, or peri-commensal rodents. And so it's written in a Q&A type fashion, where I have a series of questions, and then ultimately the answers are provided on another page. So you can use this as a way to create some exams, perhaps for your employees, or perhaps you want to kind of quiz yourself and then check up the answers. But they're on a different page, so it's harder to cheat, right? You got to try to come up with an answer on your own. But there's a lot of different questions, and it can help you really develop your understanding and awareness of dealing with commensal rodents. All right. Why don't we get started on our presentation? Because unlike our last one, which is only about 11 minutes, this one's going to go on for a little bit. So why don't we get started here? So this is part 3. Again, if you are finding us here, we have 2 other presentations that have been done the previous 2 weeks. But we're going to talk about cleaning and sanitation on this particular worm. So just to sort of recap, understand that when raccoons are shedding, they can have anywhere from 20 to 26,000 eggs per gram of feces. So these are microscopic eggs. You're not going to be able to see them with your naked eye, and it can be quite a lot, right? And so these eggs can really contaminate an area, and it doesn't take many to infect you. And so, but keep in mind that fresh eggs are not infective. They need some time in order to embryonate. Think of it like an egg that needs time to hatch, right? So it's kind of not a perfect analogy, but it kind of gives you a kind of a loose analogy for understanding that. And so when you're dealing with fresh scat, those eggs likely aren't infective if they need time to embryonate. But these eggs can last a long time in soil, provided it is moist enough, right? Because they will desiccate. So how do you kill it? How do you kill these eggs? Well, some research that was done published in 2007, found that the eggs were deactivated when the temperature reached 144 degrees Fahrenheit for about a minute. Now keep in mind, this was done in a lab under ideal conditions, and the eggs were not in an insulative capacity. What I mean by that is that the eggs weren't wrapped up in raccoon feces where they could be protected from the heat that was being brought to bear. These were washed eggs in water, and so as you raise the temperature in the water, the eggs got the full temperature, where you can have, and you think about it, you wear a jacket to protect yourself from the cold, or perhaps you wear an umbrella to protect yourself from the sun's radiation, right? So this is what happened with these eggs, and that the eggs, so this temperature will kill them, but don't just assume, well, I'm hitting it with 144 degrees, therefore the eggs must be dead in a real situation. That's not always the case, because a little bit of debris could protect those eggs from reaching the 144 degrees necessary. And also keep in mind that you need to have that contact time long enough so those eggs are being exposed to 144 degrees for about a minute. Right? So there's some variables here, so don't just run off and say, oh, we're just going to get to 144 degrees. It's a little bit more complicated than just that. The eggs are persistent, all right? And that means they last a long time in the environment. If you've gone into my first presentation, you'll recognize that the eggs can last for years in the right situation. So don't think that just time and time alone is going to be enough to kill these particular eggs over time. They can last for years. Now, another confounding issue with these eggs is they have a sticky coating that allows them to adhere to surfaces. Now, what is important, if you're trying to clean something, you're not going to be killing the eggs, but you can at least get the eggs away from a sensitive area. And that requires a 20% bleach, typically with hot water, to strip the eggs of this sticky coat that allows those eggs to be washed away. Notice I didn't say they were dead. Bleach does not kill the eggs. Okay, so it only allows you to remove that sticky coating so you can push the egg somewhere else. Well, if you're saying, Stephen, if heat is sufficient to kill these eggs, which it is, if you get the right temperature for long enough, it will kill the eggs. Is an attic hot enough to kill the eggs? Well, some research that was done gives us the short answer of no. The attics did not get hot enough to get to the 144 degree level. However, there is some evidence that suggests that the attics can degrade the eggs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. But just in terms of a pure temperature situation, the attics do not get hot enough to kill the eggs outright. So how do we manage Baylisascaris procyonis? That's what I mean by BP, not the company, not the oil company BP, but BP is Baylisascaris procyonis, the raccoon roundworm mix. Well, there are three principles of managing this particular infection. Right? First thing you want to do is reduce the contamination area. Right? That makes sense. You don't want to make the problem bigger than what it already is. Second, you want to make sure you prevent contact with contaminated materials. So that's part of that, reducing contamination. You don't want to spread it at the site, but you don't want to get it onto you either. And then the third element is education, which is what we're doing right now. Awareness is the first step, right? So that you protect yourself, because avoidance is one way to keep yourself from being exposed to this particular nasty, okay? Now, raccoon latrines are a problem because this is where those eggs are going to be deposited. As the raccoon defecates, it comes along with those eggs because the worms are in the small intestine of the raccoon and they are pumping out eggs, of which the raccoon is defecating it along with other food. So latrines occur in locations such as logs, wood piles, the ground, decks, roofs. I have a picture of a roof right here. So raccoon latrines can be in a variety of locations. All of them now become a potential source for raccoon roundworm. Now, some research in a journal article that did some work in California found, and these were the three cities that I worked at, Pacific Grove, Caramel, and San Jose, and look at where the locations of the raccoon latrines were in those particular communities. Roofs to Pacific Grove and Caramel. Here we have the ground. We have San Jose, who had more ground ones, and it had roofs, and then wood piles are kind of blended. And then the base or fork of trees. That's often, Caramel had a lot of those. Maybe it's a very well-treed area. And then, of course, other locations where the raccoon latrine was positioned. So they're all over the place. All of them are in need of proper management. So what do we do in situations where the raccoon has defecated on a roof? Well, this is more serious than what you would think. Of course, we want to put our attention on raccoon contamination inside of a structure, but did you know that raccoons defecating on a roof can still be a problem because as rain falls, it's moving that feces into the gutter, then into the downspout, and then when the water takes those feces and bring them out into the soil, it now contaminates that soil because it's moved the eggs from the roof to the ground. So when a kid comes out the door and starts playing in mommy's flower garden that may be against the house, near the downspout, now the kid can be exposed. This is how some people have been exposed with raccoon roundworm in this situation. Others have been exposed by interacting with wood piles where a raccoon was defecating on top of the wood pile. Take this seriously. Now, there was an important paper that I was involved with. It's entitled A Draft Proposal for an Industry-Wide Protocol for the Cleanup of Raccoon Latrines. I published it at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. It is available for a free download. It's basically my attempt to create an outline or a process that wildlife control operators can employ to manage raccoon roundworm in different situations, both inside of a building and outside of a building. It's not the final word. I've basically tried to create a protocol so that someone who knows even more than I do can use it as a starting point, criticize it, and then make it better. So I did a good faith effort. This publication came out, probably 20 years ago now. And I am not aware of any advances on this particular document. Now, that's not necessarily a credit to me, right? It's probably a credit to the issue that no one's really taken up the mantle to try to explore this. Now, to the extent that it's correct or false, I don't know. Because it was based on the best information I could obtain at the time. And it may be overkill. Maybe some of my guidelines may be too much work. Maybe I was suggesting we're doing more than we have to do. Maybe I'm not suggesting enough. I don't know. But I wanted to sort of create something because it's easier to criticize than it is to create. So I created something, put it out there for people to interact with. There's the link. If you just did a Google search on the title, it will come up. It's not hidden. It's not behind a firewall. It's available to the world. Consider it. Read it. What I'm going to talk about here in the rest of my presentation is a synopsis of some of the information contained in this document. But keep in mind, I'm assuming you're going to be reading this document if you want to get into the nitty-gritty. I'm just giving some overall principles and concepts, but if you want the details, you've got to read this particular document. We're in sort of uncharted territory here, right? We haven't had researchers delve into this more deeply. I tried to get the National Wildlife Control Operators Association to do some research on it. It's not the present administration. This goes back again 20 plus years ago. Okay. So don't just yell at the people that are there now. That's not who I'm referring to. This was way back. And we had an opportunity to support some research where we would have gained some important information about killing this egg. What were the environmental conditions needed to kill the egg? Unfortunately, the administration at that time, I don't mean the political administration, I'm referring to the association, did not want to provide the $5,000 or $6,000 needed to perform the research, which was sad because we had the other half of the money being provided by the insurance industry. So it was a missed opportunity because we wouldn't have been able to do it any cheaper because we were actually going to piggyback on other research. And so a lot of the infrastructure costs were already taken care of. It was a no-brainer, but I could not get the association to support it, which was very, very sad. We really lost a huge opportunity, and I'm still kind of a little irritated by it even after all this time. But nevertheless, I don't want you blaming the present administration because this was a long time ago. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. But nevertheless, we all bear the benefits and disadvantages of our leadership, whether they're in charge now or they were in charge in the past, right? So this is part of the deal. But nevertheless, that's what happened. Now, read the paper. There's lots that we don't know. This presentation, as I've already mentioned, is just hitting some highlights. It doesn't mean that our knowledge is complete or completely correct. Proceed with caution on this. Raccoon roundworm is serious. It's not plutonium, it's not radiation, but it is serious, and it's very easy to contaminate different locations, right? So you want to be careful. Keep in mind, other animals carry this worm, right? So we focus on the raccoon because the raccoon is the key one that seems to really be able to spread this worm around, but it's not the only one. Other animals carry similar worms as well. So as I tell people, poo is bad, don't touch this, right? So be careful. Wear your PPE. That could be Tyvek coveralls that are disposable. You want to have a good HEPA filter. I'm a big fan of a full face HEPA filter respirator. You want to be sure it's properly fit tested and quality. You don't want to get cheap filters. We've already mentioned before in our first presentation how well these filters can take the eggs out because you don't want to inhale, you don't want to bring this into your mouth. So whenever you're working in a confined space and disturbing raccoon feces, whether in confined space or not, you want to be sure you're wearing your PPE. And you want to be sure you're also wearing rubber boots that you can then wash off and use bleach to clean the eggs off. And you don't want to be using your street shoes and then go into your home. Hold on a minute. I need to sneeze. All right. I think I got past it. All right. So let's talk about outdoor toilets. Raccoons, as you know, create large toilets. So if you're in an area where there is a toilet on someone's property, you want to spray it down with some water or soapy water to keep the dust down. You want to carefully remove the first several inches of topsoil. Now notice I have two different rings here. I have a green circle and an orange circle. The green circle is the latrine itself. The orange circle is the area that you need to remove the soil. Why is that? Because rain are going to move some of those eggs to an area wider than the toilet itself. And so you want to and it's a judgment call, right? You're going to have to determine, is this a flat land? Is it going to move evenly on all sides? Is it on a little bit of an incline? So therefore what's downstream from the toilet is going to be more contaminated than what is upstream from the toilet, right? And then you're going to scoop all this up, put it inside of a double bag of industrial strength plastic, and then either bury it or incinerate it. And then you're going to flame over the rest of the soil with a propane weed burner, burn it down, and then you're going to turn the soil over, burn it down again. Now, they're going to be pulling out, like those propane weed burners come out with a lot of, they're not only hot, but they have a lot of heat. You're going to need to use that. Why? Because soil is an insulator. So you're going to really need to kind of cook things up a little bit because you're trying to kill as many of those eggs as possible. The problem, of course, is how do you know whether you've gotten the job done right? You don't, unless you're doing testing, and who's going to pay for that, right? So you just want to be thorough and recognize that you're just going to do a good faith effort and have reasoning behind. Big fan of taking pictures to document your type of work in case something comes back. But you never want to promise your client everything is safe, because how do you prove that? How do you take care of that, right? Because if a raccoon comes back and defecates at that spot, all of your work is basically for naught, other than there's now a dropping there. What do you do if you're inside of an attic? You're not going to use a propane torch inside of an attic, right? You'll burn the building down. So the first step, of course, is make sure that no new feces is being added. So you want to make sure you remove the infestation of raccoons, and you want to make sure they can't get into that attic again. Make sure, second, the attic doesn't leak. Raccoon roundworm will die through desiccation. That is, it will dry out and die if it has enough time and enough heat, and it's not getting moisture. So you got to make sure the attic doesn't leak. This means that if before you clean out an attic, you want to wait until the summer is over. So you want to make sure you're securing the attic so no new raccoons are getting up there. And then you want to put it off until the fall. If you can put it off till the following fall, all the better. Because the longer those droppings are going to be dry and in a hot attic over the summer, the more likely some of the more eggs are going to be dead. Again, you can't prove it unless you have it tested, right? So we're trying to reduce your risk. And plus, who wants to clean an attic when it's hot out? Because heat stroke is also a threat to your health. So be careful, right? You want to be sure that you're dealing safely in attics. Now, let me do a little caveat here. If you're in an attic and you see one little dropping from a raccoon, you don't have to do an entire attic clean out. Now, if your client wants that, okay, but there's no real reason. All you got to do is, of course, you're going to have your respirator on because you're never going into an attic without your respirator and your gloves and that sort of thing. You're going to protect yourself, right? Because you don't know what else is up there. But all you have to do is take a Ziploc bag, like I have pictured here, turn it inside out, put your hand in it, grab the droppings with a copious amount of insulation around it, pull it in to the bag, seal it, and then put that into another bag, and then remove it from the attic. But if you're dealing with a large toilet, something that's 3 feet wide or something, now that's going to take a little bit more work because the raccoons have been there a while, right? There's probably going to be trails through the insulation. That's where you have to have a conversation as to whether or not your client wants to have a quote-unquote clean out, right? But don't abuse your clients by saying, oh, we found a raccoon dropping. We got to do a $50,000 attic clean out job because I found one dropping or just a few droppings. Be reasonable here, right? So, and then just make sure you're not cross-contaminating. Now, when you're dealing with a large latrine, you're going to have a plan, right? So if you're dealing with a lot of contamination in the attic, maybe there's a couple of latrines in the attic. I don't know. Again, these are judgment calls. Okay, I'm going to emphasize that again. There's no hard, fast rule. You're going to make sure that how are you going to take those droppings out of the building? You don't want to carry them through the house, because you may contaminate other areas through the dusting, right? So here we have an example of some plastic sheathing. Some people will actually take that out. They'll punch out through the attic vents and bring the material out directly to the outside, so you're not going through the living space proper. But that's not always the case. So the analogy I use in dealing with raccoon roundworm is follow the practices that would be used by someone who is trying to remove asbestos. If you follow those types of protocols, you're going to be pretty much on the road, because I used that as a model to do the the cleanup information on Raccoon Roundworm, because that's the only model I really had. So that's what I did. Now, is it right? I hope so. We need research, but we need to probably do something. Okay. Consider wetting down the latrine because you don't want that stuff being aerosolized. Do you need air scrubbers? You might if you're shoveling it. You don't want to use. I'm not a big fan of HEPA vacuums, although I understand that some of the professional ones used in the pest control field are double bagged, so that if one bag, rips, the second bag will still be able to capture things. Now, keep in mind the raccoon roundworm eggs are significantly larger eggs than what a HEPA filter filters out, so that's not a problem. But I'm always nervous about vacuuming. So what some people do is they'll have you have to kind of think about where is that vacuum exhausting to, right? You don't want to be blowing things outdoors and saying, all right, I'm blowing it outdoors, but where is all that material going to, right? What kind of plume is being created? So these are some questions that need to be really analyzed on a research basis, or just maybe some common sense, and think about it. Now, there have been guys moving big jobs and doing big latrine jobs. I would have thought that if this was a big issue, we'd have probably heard something by now. Is that the best way to gather information? The answer is no. But sometimes that's all we have. So I tend to be a little bit more on the paranoid side because I'm always worried about lawsuits. Other people aren't. I may be wrong, right? I may be right. I don't know. And so this is where you as a professional have to make some of these tough decisions, and maybe your insurance company can help give you some additional guidance. Maybe one of you out there will have information about additional research that was done, or maybe different practices that would provide different color and more information than what I provided in my proposal, my draft proposal. Keep in mind, eggs are durable. Hot, dry attics in the summer will likely kill some through defecation in a few weeks, especially when you start getting up to 130 degrees, 135 degrees in an attic. Even though it doesn't reach the 144 degrees necessary, and then you have all the insulation that's also protecting the eggs, desiccation does kill eggs, but we don't know how long it takes in actuality. That's what the research was that I was hoping to get funded. They were going to do a lab study with eggs and put them in different ovens at different temperatures and at different humidity levels to see what the environmental conditions were needed to kill the eggs and how long it took. Unfortunately, we never got that research, which was, I got to stop. Okay, but nevertheless, we don't know. Hopefully someone will do the work, and then we will know. And then you could use sensors in an attic that test for humidity and temperature, and put several of these around the attic. And then maybe you find, if we had a chart, you could then say, okay, on the basis of this chart and the research that was done before, when we reach this level of temperature for this long and this level of humidity for this long, we have a 95% confidence that all the eggs are going to be dead. That's how you would work that out. Anyways, what do you do with non-flammable surfaces? Use a weed burner. Here we have an example of me using it on a trap. Remember, you only need to have 144 degrees for a little less than a minute to kill the eggs and make them inactive. But keep in mind that when you have a lot of heavily soiled material that provides some insulation, you're going to have to leave that flame on there for a longer period of time to get through that insulation and kill the eggs behind it. Should you flame your traps? I think it's probably a good idea. There's a lot of advantages. If you are ever renting your traps out, I would absolutely encourage you to be flaming your traps before you send them out to the client, right? Because the client, you may tell the client to wear gloves, doesn't mean they're going to wear gloves. So you want to be sure you're protecting yourself. And also there's some odor removal benefits of it as well. You don't have to have your traps glowing red in order to kill the eggs, but you need to make sure you flame it. But again, How heavily do you need to flame it? It's a judgment call again, because who's getting their traps tested for raccoon roundworm eggs? That's the problem. What do you do in areas that are sensitive to fire where you cannot use, or let me say you should not use a propane torch? Well, in those situations, you want to be thinking about removing as much debris as possible, and then maybe hitting it with boiling water, because that's going to be 212. And then steam, not water, not hot water vapor. I'm talking about true steam. Those are going to be some ways to kill the eggs as well in areas that are fire sensitive. You want to make sure when you're trapping, you're protecting surfaces. Why? Because the contamination, when a raccoon gets trapped, where does he go to the bathroom? He has to go to the bathroom in the trap. And you don't want to ruin someone's deck by having raccoon feces on it, right? So you want to make sure. So in my early days, I used newspaper, but you see the raccoons chewed it up, right? A much better way of doing it, as a colleague done it here, is using some plywood that you bring and put down, and then put the traps on top of that. That way you're not making the mess on their deck, but also you're able to remove that feces without leaving any debris behind. So that's certainly something to be thinking about. Legalities. Again, I'm not a lawyer. However, there are some things you need to keep in mind. Never say you disinfect it. Now, there are 3 different levels of cleaning. The lowest level, the one that has the least amount of killing power, and that's cleaning. Cleaning means you're basically removing the dirt. And with the dirt, sometimes you'll be removing bacteria and viruses that are attached to the dirt. That's cleaning. The next level, that is called sanitizing. That's where you are reducing the number of biological contaminants that can infect us. That's sanitizing. You're not killing everything, you're just killing some of them, right? That's sanitizing. Disinfecting is where you are basically making the area sterile so that nothing there is remaining that can be infective. You should never use that term in regards to a raccoon latrine cleanup. You're not disinfecting, because there are no chemicals that can be legally used to disinfect an area that has been contaminated with raccoon roundworm. You can use fire, but that's not a disinfectant in the terms of a chemical situation, right? You're using temperature, a physical property of temperature. So never tell your client you are disinfecting. Never tell your client you are sanitizing. I would be saying we're cleaning and we're making the area safer. You are not making it safe. You have reduced the risk, but you have not eliminated the risk. You want to be very modest in what you're selling here, right? Unless something comes on the market that has been proven to kill these worms. So you may be using, hospital grade disinfectant. The roundworm egg is going to laugh at you. It does not kill it. Now, it kills a lot of other things, and it's a great product. I'm not telling you not to use it. Okay, if you're licensed to use it, because again, it is a chemical, and you may need to have a pesticide permit to use it. Some states will require that. Make sure you're following the law. But it's doing nothing for raccoon roundworm. It kills a lot of other things, but it won't touch that. So keep that in mind. Bottom line, know the risks related to raccoon roundworm. Again, this is the third of 3 presentations on raccoon roundworm. Make sure you're protecting yourself and your clients. Do not hype the fear about this just so you can wedge more money out of your clients. You need to be sober, responsible. There's a risk here, but understand people have been working with raccoons for generations. Okay, if it's not plutonium, then we're not all dead, right? But it is something we need to be careful of, and particularly for young children. And do not oversell the impact of your feces removal service, right? Don't say, oh, we're going to make everything perfect and it's going to be normal. You want to be careful with that, right? You are going to improve the situation, hopefully, if you're doing it correctly, but you could be cross-contaminating as well. So know what you're getting into. Read the publication. Again, it gives you, at least if nothing else, things to think about before you march into this particular area. Well, that's pretty much it for this. Of course, there's more to be said, but it gives you at least a a little bit of a sketch on what we're dealing with here with this raccoon roundworm. Well, I'm Stephen Van Tassel. I am the owner of Wildlife Control Consultant, and you've been listening to the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast. We'd love to hear your questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions for new shows, and you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. We've been talking about raccoon roundworm to make sure you're protecting yourself and your clients and your loved ones. So be careful out there and take care.
This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant podcast. Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.